I only needed a locked door. Then the old workshop recognized my family.
No phone, no bank card, no dry shoes, just a thin green coat and $6 she had hidden inside the hem after selling her last paperback. And with that $6, she bought a forgotten paintbrush maker's loft near Jones Falls in Baltimore County, Maryland, erased from county maps in 1978. The west wall bowed 6 inches outward. Rain entered through 3 broken roof valleys. Baltimore County condemned it on October 14, 2022, with demolition planned for spring. But beneath the load shaft of an iron bristle clamp, a hollow mahogany chamber had waited unopened for decades, holding money, a silver-handled brush, and the last careful words of a dead craftsman. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Hazel Anne Mercer had been sorting her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Dundalk, she separated bent nails from straight ones in coffee tins, buttons by size in a chipped saucer. Order was not cleanliness to her. It was a way of finding what could still be used. Her mother, Ruth, worked the laundry room at a nursing home and came home smelling of steam, bleach, and other people's winter coats. She could stretch soup for 3 evenings and silence for a week. When trouble entered a room, Ruth made herself smaller, as though stillness might persuade it to pass. The one person who never asked Hazel to disappear was her grandfather, Elias Mercer. Every Saturday, he took her by bus to the Maryland Institute College of Art library where he repaired old artists' brushes for students who could not afford new ones. His hands were blunt and scarred, but under the green-shaded reading lamps they became exact. He rolled the sable hair against a white card to find broken tips, pinched hog bristle into even flags, and warmed a dark cake of pitch in a spoon over an alcohol flame. Hazel watched him seat each bundle into a brass ferrule, tap the rim square with a bone folder, and crimp it to an oak handle with a hand press he carried in a wooden case. At noon, they shared an apple and 2 hard-boiled eggs on the library steps. He gave her the better half without mentioning it. "Soft hair is not weak," Elias told her once. "It only needs to be gathered in the right direction." Hazel remembered the sentence because he was looking at the brush, not at her. He died in March 2016 after a short illness that left his workbench untouched. By the time Hazel reached the row house, the landlord had emptied the cellar. The press, the bone folder, the ferrules, and 3 notebooks of formulas had gone into a demolition bin. Ruth stood beside the curb holding Elias's wooden case, but it was empty. Years later, Darren entered Hazel's life quietly. He did not strike her. He corrected. He changed the passwords because she was careless, checked the mileage because gasoline cost money, and placed her clothes in piles he called respectable and embarrassing. When she laughed too loudly, his jaw tightened. When she mentioned taking a library job, he left the apartment for 3 hours and returned with flowers bought on her card. By then, every room seemed to contain his listening. On November 3, 2022, Hazel came home to find her blue ceramic bird on the floor, its beak broken cleanly from its face. Darren had emptied her wallet and laid the cards in a straight row beside an online betting screen. Ruth sat at the kitchen table, summoned there by him, both hands around a mug she did not drink from. Hazel reached for the cards. Darren closed his palm over them. "You leave now, or I ruin what remains." 8 words. His voice never rose. Hazel looked at her mother. Ruth's thumb moved once along the mug's cracked handle, then stopped. She did not stand. Hazel took the green coat from the hook, slipped Elias's empty wooden case under her arm, and walked into the fog while Darren turned the deadbolt behind her. For 6 weeks, she moved west and north in small, cold increments. The first 2 nights, she slept upright in Penn Station, waking whenever the cleaning machine passed. In Catonsville, she had paid $3 for a church basement shower and left $1 beneath the soap dish because the volunteer had looked away when her time expired. She spent 89 cents on crackers, then counted the coins beneath a bus shelter on Frederick Road. In Ellicott City, she slept behind a stone retaining wall above the Patapsco, where mist settled inside her sleeves. A security guard found her before dawn, gave her coffee, and pointed toward a warming center. By Thanksgiving, she had $11.40. By the first week of December, $8. She stopped buying coffee, then stopped riding buses, then stopped entering stores unless she already knew the price. At night, she kept the empty case under her head. Once, in a parking garage near Towson, a gust lifted the lid and scattered nothing across the concrete. Hazel closed it carefully anyway. The classified advertisement appeared on December 15th in the Baltimore County Public Library branch at Cockeysville. County Lien Disposal, it read, 1 Industrial Loft, Jones Falls District. Structure unsafe. Deed transfer, $6 plus signature. The librarian. A silver-haired woman named Mrs. Bell saw Hazel copy the address and slid a county road atlas across the desk. That road is mostly gone, she said. Hazel studied the contour lines, the creek, and the black square marking a building no newer map admitted existed. $6 would leave her almost nothing. It would also buy a door that could be closed from the inside. She returned the atlas, kept the copied directions, and walked toward the bus station with the bill folded inside her glove. By dusk, Hazel had chosen the ruin before she had seen it. The first bus carried Hazel north before sunrise, its windows clouded by the breath of 6 passengers. She rode as far as Hunt Valley, then walked the shoulder of York Road until traffic shook grit against her coat. By noon, she had covered 9 miles. That night, she slept in a hay barn beyond Phoenix, tucked between square bales while wind pressed through the boards. The temperature fell to 27 degrees. She kept Elias's empty case against her ribs and woke with straw in her hair and ice along the bottle's rim. The settlement nearest the property was called Rockland, though it was little more than a bend where old industry had thinned into houses. Hazel passed Phelps Hardware, Doris's Creekside Cafe, Morrow Feed and Seed, the Rockland Barber Shop, and Bell & Sons Clock Repair. Its window crowded with stopped faces. A county placard pointed toward a low annex behind the volunteer fire hall. Inside, heat clicked through a cast-iron radiator. A woman with a white streak through her dark hair sat beneath a framed county map. Her left thumb wore a brown leather guard polished by years of paper cuts. The brass plate on her desk read, Margaret Vale, Land Records. Hazel laid down the advertisement. Mrs. Vale read it once. You understand the building has no occupancy permit. Yes, ma'am. You understand the well has not been tested? Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not remove debris? Yes, ma'am. You understand demolition remains authorized if you abandon it? Yes, ma'am. The clerk spread the deed across a felt blotter. The transfer price was written twice, once in numerals and once in words, as though $6 might otherwise be an error. Hazel signed Hazel Anne Mercer beneath grantee. Mrs. Vale accepted the folded bill, smoothed it with her guarded thumb, and lowered a brass stamp. The mechanism struck with a deep official knock. Take Falls Road south for 1.8 miles, she said. Turn left at the stone culvert with no rail. Follow the service lane past the second walnut grove. The loft is below the ridge beside the old mill race. Hazel reached for the papers, but Mrs. Vale kept one hand on them. Mercer, she said, were you related to Elias Mercer? The radiator gave a hollow tick. He was my grandfather. Mrs. Vale opened a drawer and lifted a brittle index card. E. Mercer was written across it in blue ink, followed by dates and parcel numbers. He came here with repair petitions for that place from the late 70s onward. He said the workshop should not be demolished because its tools belonged to a Baltimore trade almost nobody remembered. Hazel touched the card's edge. Why did he care about it? He said someone taught him there. Mrs. Vale studied her face. I assumed he meant before the war, though I never knew which war or whose. She slid over the deed, then placed Hazel's $6 bill in her desk drawer instead of the cash box. Keep your copy dry, she said. A mile along Falls Road, the houses gave way to steep woods and dark water. Hazel crossed the broken culvert and found the service lane under wet leaves. An old man in a canvas coat stood beside a mailbox, holding a red leash attached to a gray, muzzled hound. You headed to the brushworks? Hazel nodded. Amos Pike. Dog's Ruthie. She dislikes thunder and county inspectors. Ruthie sniffed Elias's case, sneezed, and sat. Amos pointed beyond 2 rows of walnut trees. "Stay left when the road divides." Right ends in water. The loft appeared by degrees, first as a chimney above the slope, then as a long wall of weathered brick and timber beside the abandoned mill race. It was roughly 30 feet wide and 60 feet deep, 2 stories beneath a steep slate roof patched with rusting tin. The chimney leaned toward the creek. Across the upper facade, a faded sign still carried 4 words: Mercer, Fine Artist Brushes. Rain began to darken Hazel's coat. The front door had swollen inside its frame. She worked Elias's case into the gap as a lever until the latch tore free. Air came out first, dense with damp ash, spoiled pitch, and the animal sweetness of old Bristle. She tasted dust before she saw it. The front room had once been a shop. A counter leaned beneath shelves lined with empty brass ferrules, each green at the rim. Her sleeve brushed a hanging strand of hog hair, and the brittle fibers broke like dry grass. Somewhere in the wall, water moved steadily. The floor tilted toward the mill race. In back, the last light found iron machines beneath canvas sheets. Hazel pulled one corner free. Black dust rose with a bitter tar smell that caught behind her tongue. Underneath stood a cast-iron press with a wheel as wide as her shoulders. Rows of rusted clamps waited on a bench, their jaws packed with dark residue. She put her palm against the largest and felt cold enter the bones of her hand. A mouse moved inside a drawer. From the chimney came the soft collapse of something loose. Hazel chose a place near the inner wall where the roof boards showed no fresh stain. She swept a rectangle with a cedar shingle, laid down flattened feed sacks, and used the green coat as a blanket. For supper, she ate her last crackers and drank from the bottle she had carried since Hunt Valley. Rain tapped the broken valleys above her. The building answered with slow creaks, each distinct enough to learn. Before sleeping, she set the deed inside Elias's case and wired the torn latch shut. The door was crude, the floor was cold, and no one else possessed a key. Soft hairs, bound tightly and aimed in one direction, could carry enough color to make something lasting. At first light, Hazel followed the mill race until she found the well behind a collapsed smokehouse. Its stone curb was intact, but the wooden cover had rotted through. She tied her bottle to a length of sash cord, lowered it 12 feet, and brought up water the color of weak tea. She boiled it in a dented enamel pot found beneath the shop counter. The outhouse stood uphill among blackberry canes, one hinge remaining and half the roof gone. By the 3rd day, she knew which floorboards complained beneath a heel, which groaned only after rain, and which one near the press gave no warning at all. She returned to Rockland, carrying 2 rusted ferrules and the county deed inside Elias's case. Phelps' hardware smelled of rope, lamp oil, cedar shavings, and the iron dust that gathers beneath old key machines. Behind the counter stood Vernon Phelps, a narrow man with a white mustache clipped shorter on one side. He wore a carpenter's pencil through the hole where his shirt pocket had torn. "I own the brush works," Hazel said. "I need enough to make one room safe." Vernon inspected the deed, then the ferrules. He rubbed one between finger and thumb until a line of brass appeared. Cash, not enough. He took down a ruled ledger. "I'll carry $30 until February, no interest. You write every item and you don't buy what you can borrow." Hazel signed beneath 3 farmers and the volunteer fire department. Vernon added a dog-eared copy of Home Repairs for the careful owner. "That's free," he said. "It has bad drawings and good measurements." She bought a wire chimney brush for $6.40, 20 feet of polypropylene rope for $3.15, a canvas drop cloth for $4.75, stove cement for $2.30, a box of cut nails for $3.80, and 2 pounds of rice for $1.18. Vernon loaned her a flat shovel, a claw hammer, and a soot-blackened inspection mirror wrapped in newspaper. The chimney took most of the next day. Hazel first sealed the fireplace opening with the canvas, leaving one corner loose for the rope. From the roof, she removed 3 cracked slates, straddled the ridge, and lowered the brush until it struck an obstruction 14 feet down. She worked it in short lifts, turning clockwise so the threaded head would not unscrew. Creosote fell in hard flakes, glossy as beetle shells. At the 8th foot, the brush stopped again. Hazel tied a brick to the rope and dropped it twice, gently, until a bird's nest collapsed through the flue in a dry rush of twigs and gray feathers. She brushed each section 4 times, then climbed down and shoveled nearly a bushel of soot from behind the drop cloth. The work lasted 6 hours. Her palms blistered beneath the borrowed gloves, and the bitter dust settled inside her nose and ears. With the inspection mirror, she found a narrow crack at the smoke shelf and pressed stove cement into it with a spoon, smoothing the seam until no edge remained to catch heat. At dusk, she built a test fire no larger than her 2 hands. Newspaper first, then cedar splinters, then 3 pieces of dry walnut found beneath the eaves. Smoke hesitated beneath the lintel before rising in a straight blue thread. Hazel held her breath. The thread strengthened and vanished upward. She boiled rice with salt Vernon had tucked into the tool sack. The pot trembled above the coals, giving off the plain, warm smell of starch. She ate, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her back toward the brick, while heat reached the room 1 patient inch at a time. It was the first hot meal she had eaten indoors in more than a month. The following morning she began the workroom inventory. She chose the objects that still held a purpose and set them on the long bench: a bundle gauge marked in 30/2 of an inch, a brass ferrule mandrel, a pair of duckbill pliers, an oak-handled crimping punch, a stone slab darkened by pitch, 6 paper packets of sable hair, and a silver scale whose pans had corroded green. At the end of the bench stood the iron bristle clamp she had touched on her first night. It was larger than the other presses and bolted through the floor into a timber below. A mahogany core ran beneath its load shaft, though mahogany made little sense in a machine built to withstand pressure and glue. Hazel wiped away the black dust. The wood was 18 inches long, oval in section, and joined by a seam so exact it disappeared whenever she looked directly at it. She tapped each machine with the wooden handle of the hammer. The smaller clamps answered with a bright iron note. The large one returned 2 sounds, metal at the jaws and a low padded knock beneath the shaft. Hazel tapped again, hollow. She loosened the 4 floor bolts a quarter turn, enough to ease the strain without shifting the frame. Then she wedged a nail beneath one end of the mahogany core and tested its weight. It rose too easily. Solid wood of that size should have required both hands. This piece lifted beneath 3 fingers and settled without a thud. At the rear, she found a cedar disc darkened to resemble the surrounding grain. A narrow slot crossed its center. The blade of Vernon's borrowed screwdriver fit poorly, so Hazel filed an old ferrule flat against the stone slab until it made a broad, thin key. She inserted it and turned left. The disc moved once, no more than the thickness of a fingernail. She stopped, cleaned the slot with a hog bristle, and tried again. The cedar disc turned half a circle. A smell escaped that did not belong to the loft's mildew or pitch. Dry paper, camphor, old cedar kept from weather. Hazel laid the canvas cloth across the bench and slid the disc free. Behind it was a cavity bored deep into the mahogany, directly beneath the clamp's load-bearing shaft. The first object was wrapped in waxed linen and tied with black thread. She eased it out with duckbill pliers, supporting the weight from below. There were 5 packages. The smallest contained 3 tools, an ivory bundle comb with teeth fine as eyelashes, a miniature brass crimping block, and a narrow awl whose handle bore the initials E.M. The second held raw sable hair bound at the root in blue silk, each bundle labeled by length and spring. The third contained pale wild boar bristles, stiffer at the base and naturally split at the tips. Between them lay folded drafts showing ratios in Elias's handwriting. 2 parts, sable to 1 part, boar for wash brushes, equal parts for heavy-bodied color, every broken filament removed before the ferrule was warmed. The 4th package held a single brush. Its silver handle was no longer than Hazel's palm, cast with a row of walnut leaves. The hairs came to a perfect dark point when she breathed across them. The last parcel was a rectangular tin box wrapped twice in oilcloth. Hazel set it on the canvas and waited until her hands stopped shaking. Its latch had been sealed with a strip of pitch. She warmed the edge near the small fire, keeping it well below the heat that would scorch paper, and lifted the pitch with the awl. Inside lay an envelope, a military medal, and money. Hazel did not open the envelope. She placed the bills in stacks of 20, aligning each corner with the bundle gauge. Most were older notes, folded once but dry. Beneath them were paper rolls of coins. Silver Morgan dollars, Walking Liberty half-dollars, Mercury dimes, and Indian head cents dark as old blood. She counted each roll twice and recorded the amounts on the back page of the repair manual. The bills totaled $39,800. The silver dollars added $900. The half-dollars, dimes, and cents added $500 more, $41,200. The medal was a Purple Heart in a worn leather case. The reverse carried a name she did not recognize and the year 1944. A narrow ribbon had faded at the fold, but the profile of Washington remained sharp beneath her thumb. Hazel returned the money to the tin, leaving the stacks in counted order. She placed the silver-handled brush beside the unopened envelope and covered everything with the canvas. Then she fed one piece of walnut to the fire, checked the wire on the front door, and walked outside. The rain had passed. Beyond the trees, the mill race held a strip of moonlight without trembling. Hazel stood on the bank until the cold reached through her shoes. She did not plan what the money could buy. She listened instead to water slipping beneath the ruined gate, traveling through darkness by the channel someone had given it long ago. Soft hairs, bound tightly and aimed in one direction, could carry enough color to make something lasting. Morning entered through the cracked east window and laid a pale bar across the tin box. Hazel fed the fire, washed her hands in boiled water, and set the envelope on the bundle gauge. The writing slanted sharply downward, each capital formed with a narrow hook. She had seen that hand on library repair tags, grocery lists, and the note Elias once left inside her lunch. Take the better apple. It was her grandfather's. She opened the envelope with the awl. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, then you have worked carefully enough to deserve what the clamp kept. I hope you opened it without splitting the cedar disc. I fitted that disc in Baltimore in the winter of 1979 when my hands were still steady and I believed I would return the following spring. I am writing from St. Agnes Hospital in Baltimore. Dr. Miriam Cole has told me the cancer began in my pancreas and has already reached the liver. She is honest, which is a rarer kindness than comfort. I have weeks, perhaps less. There are matters I cannot repair now, so I am leaving instructions for someone patient. The line began with Elias Mercer, born in Harford County in 1849, who opened this brushworks beside Jones Falls in 1876. His daughter, Ada Mercer, learned to grade sable here and carried the trade to Philadelphia in 1901. Her son, Nathan, returned to Maryland in 1928 and made lettering brushes until wartime shortages emptied the drawers. Nathan's son was my father, Samuel Mercer, born in 1907, who reopened the loft after the Depression and taught me to bind hair before I could sharpen a pencil. I was born in Baltimore in 1933. 4 generations stood at this bench. My brother Thomas went to France with the 29th Infantry Division and died near St. Lo in July 1944. The medal beside this letter was returned to our mother. She could not bear to open the case, so my father kept it among the tools, where grief could remain close to work without being spoken aloud. The trade closed on August 31st, 1978. Orders had slowed, machine-made brushes cost less, and the roof had begun to fail. Since then, more than 37 years of silence have gathered here. The drafts are not recipes unless your hands learn the reasons beneath them. Warm brass ferrules to 140 degrees, never hotter, or the sable will curl at the root. For a wash brush, begin with 2 measures of sable to 1 of split-bore bristle. Roll the bundle 12 times on clean card, removing every hair that turns sideways. After the pitch is poured, hold the ferrule upright for 90 seconds before crimping. Let it cool a full day before setting the handle. The money is not a reward. It is roof, mortar, glass, food, and time enough to make one honest decision at a time. Inheritance is not what a family says it owns. It is the work someone keeps from being lost. Behind the back door, beneath the lower hinge, you will find a walnut leaf cut into the sill. Follow where its stem points. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Elias Nathan Mercer marched to 2016. Hazel read the letter twice. The second time, she rested one finger beneath each line, as she had done while learning difficult words beside him. When she finished, she folded the sheets along their original creases, neither sharper nor looser, and returned them to the envelope. The paper fit as though it had only borrowed the morning. She carried the letter through the back room and opened the swollen door toward the mill race. Beneath the lower hinge, nearly hidden by pitch and dirt, was a walnut leaf cut into the oak sill. Its stem pointed toward the outside wall. Hazel knelt, brushed away moss, and found a narrow limestone marker set flat beneath the eaves. E.M. had been carved into its face. Below the initials was a shallow recess containing a brass lamp no taller than a coffee cup wrapped in rotted cloth. The wick, still turned, she cleaned the reservoir with rice and alcohol from the repair shelf, threaded fresh cotton through the burner, and filled it with the last of a small bottle of lamp oil. At dusk, she struck a match. The lamp gave a modest yellow flame, no brighter than a held breath. Its light reached the silver brush, the crimping block, and Elias's letter without touching the corners of the room. Hazel understood then that she had not arrived alone. Mrs. Bell had loaned her the county atlas without asking where she would sleep. The guard in Ellicott City had placed hot coffee near her hands before telling her to move. Margaret Vale had kept the $6 bill from vanishing into a cash drawer. Vernon Phelps had written her name into his ledger and trusted it beside those of people who had lived there all their lives. Even Amos Pike had stood in the rain until she chose the road that did not end in water. There may have been a kindness like that in your own life, something small enough that the giver may have forgotten it, a meal, a ride, a door held open when you had nowhere certain to go. What was it, and whose hand placed it within your reach? Hazel put the money back inside the tin but left the letter, the silver-handled brush, and the Purple Heart beside her bed of feed sacks. She set the brass lamp between them and turned the wick low. That night, when the loft shifted in the cold, its sounds no longer seemed like warnings. They were the careful noises of something kept. Snow arrived on December 4th, 5 inches by noon, softening the service lane and revealing every place the roof leaked by the dark circles spreading across the loft floor. Hazel read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the stove, then measured the 2 main slopes, each 32 feet long and 18 feet from ridge to eave. Allowing 10% waste, she calculated 27 bundles of cedar shingles, 6 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 12 pounds of galvanized nails. Vernon delivered the materials in his truck and set an old roofing hatchet on the bench. Its blade was narrow, its gauge notch worn smooth. "My brother used that 40 years, he said. Bring it back when the roof is honest." The next morning, Amos Pike arrived in wool trousers and a canvas coat, carrying a ladder with 1 repaired rung. He had roofed houses before his knees failed and refused the envelope Hazel offered. "Pay me by listening once." They worked 11 days. Amos showed her how to sister, a split rafter with a sound length of pine, bolted through at 16-inch intervals, and how to snap a chalk line without smearing it across wet felt. Each shingle received 3 strokes: set, drive, finish. On the 4th morning, he touched 1 nail head with his mitten. That nail's proud. Hazel raised the hatchet. Pull it. She did. By December 16, the final ridge cap lay straight beneath a hard blue sky. Hazel climbed down after dark and stood inside during a sleet shower. No drop reached the floor. January exposed what the first fire had hidden. 3 courses above the roofline were spalling, their faces breaking away in thin red shells, while mortar beneath them powdered between Hazel's fingers. She built a scaffold from borrowed planks, numbered each salvageable brick in pencil, and removed the chimney crown 1 course at a time. Vernon supplied hydraulic lime and a sack of fire clay. Hazel mixed 3 parts sharp sand to 1 part lime for the exterior joints, then added 1 part fire clay to 2 parts lime mortar around the flue tile. She soaked each old brick until bubbles stopped rising, buttered the bed joint fully, and kept the vertical joints tight enough that the trowel edge could barely enter. The work lasted 3 weeks in temperatures that rarely climbed above 28 degrees. Every 15 minutes her bare fingers went numb, and she descended to warm them around the stovepipe before returning to the scaffold. Gloves protected the skin but dulled the pressure needed to feel a full joint. On 2 mornings the mortar stiffened too quickly, and she scraped it out rather than leave a weak seam. Late on January 27th, she lit a test fire with dry walnut and 1 twist of paper. Smoke rose through the repaired throat, past the new crown, and drew clean into the winter air. Hazel watched until the last ember settled without once smelling smoke inside. The floors were white pine, wide planks fixed with hand-cut rosehead nails, their surfaces buried beneath pitch, soot, and a century of boot marks. Hazel set every raised nail with a square punch before renting a random orbit sander from Vernon for $14 a day. She worked with the grain in 3 passes, 80 grit to remove the black crust, 120 to level the scratches, and 220 to leave the boards smooth without polishing away their age. Dust entered everything. She tied a flour sack over her hair, sealed the workroom doors with damp cloth, and emptied the sander bag outdoors after every 2 boards. Beneath the grime, the pine emerged dark honey at first, then deepened toward mahogany when she rubbed in the first coat of boiled linseed oil. She applied 3 thin coats with lint-free cotton, wiping away every glossy pool after 20 minutes. The final coat cured 48 hours while she slept in the workroom and crossed the front room only on planks laid like stepping stones. One morning she woke unable to lift the sanding disc, nothing hurt enough to explain it. She walked to the marsh instead and sat on a fallen sycamore while a great blue heron stood ankle-deep in the reeds. It waited without shifting for nearly an hour. Hazel did no work that day. The next morning she returned and finished the last 6 boards. There were 8 windows. 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked from corner to corner, and 1 retained a wavering original pane, dated by the old putty and square nails to 1788. Hazel marked that sash with chalk and rebuilt around it rather than disturb the glass. She removed each damaged sash, softened the brittle glazing with low heat, and lifted the points without laboring against the muntins. The new panes came from salvaged cylinder glass Vernon found behind a cabinet. She kneaded Diap 33 glazing putty until warm, rolled it into narrow ropes, pressed a bedding bead into the rabbet, and set the glass with even pressure from the center outward. After fixing glazing points every 8 inches, she drew the putty knife in one continuous stroke, leaving a clean bevel that shed water beyond the wood. The sash cords had rotted to brown threads. Hazel replaced them with a 1/4-inch cotton cord, fed each length over the pulley, and tied a figure-8 knot through the counterweight eye so the knot could not pull flat. She balanced each sash before repainting the channels, learning to hear the difference between a weight touching the pocket wall and one hanging free. On the last window, she preserved the old pane, repaired the lower rail, and eased the sash upward. It held at shoulder height. Outside, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch close enough that she could see its small claws close around the bark. Hazel remained still until it flew. The walls were horsehair plaster pressed over hand-split oak lath, and most of them had survived because the roof had failed slowly rather than all at once. Near the chimney, however, 3 patches fell after Hazel finished them. The first cracked overnight. The second sagged from the lath. The third sounded hollow beneath her knuckle, so she cut it out before it could choose its own time to fall. Vernon brought an old feed bag of horsehair from his barn. Hazel washed it, cut the longest strands, and folded them into lime plaster until the mixture held together when lifted on the hawk. She dampened the lath, pressed on a scored scratch coat, then applied a 3/8-inch brown coat and left it 72 hours. The final coat was 1/8 inch, worked smooth with a steel trowel and softened at the edges with a wet brush. When the wall dried without opening a seam, Hazel rested her palm against it. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris from the cafe began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Tuesday. She was a broad woman with flour always caught in the seam of her left sleeve. The bags held biscuits, bean soup in a jar, and once a wedge of apple cake wrapped in waxed paper. Hazel carried money to the cafe after the 3rd delivery, but Doris pushed it back across the counter with 2 fingers. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." Caleb Pike arrived one Saturday on a red Schwinn. A splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, all elbows and solemn concentration, with one shoelace replaced by twine. Without asking, he split the fallen walnut behind the loft into stove lengths and stacked them bark up beneath the eaves. Hazel offered him $2. He shook his head. "My mother said, about your grandfather. That was all he gave her." Before leaving, he tightened the loose nut on the bicycle seat with Vernon's borrowed wrench and rode uphill without looking back. Reverend Boyd passed each morning on his walk from the parsonage to the church. His overcoat had velvet worn pale at both cuffs. He tipped his hat whenever Hazel was on the roof, at the well, or carrying mortar. On the first Sunday in March, he paused beside the gate, laid one hand on the post, and said, "Keep her through winter, Lord." Then he continued down the road. Hazel postponed the cellar until February 11th. Water had seeped beneath the door, and she wanted the chimney secure before going below with a lamp. 7 granite steps led to a 12 by 15-foot room floored in uneven fieldstone. At the center lay a dressed granite slab cut more carefully than anything around it. A small mark had been carved into its face. 3 bristles gathered inside the outline of a ferrule. Hazel cleaned the grooves with a brush but did not lift the stone. Some doors could remain closed until there was a reason to open them. Under the third stair, an oak box had been wedged between the granite stringer and the wall. She worked it free with a putty knife. Inside lay a brass key, its bow shaped like the same bound bristle mark, and a tintype wrapped in linen. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the loft in the summer light, one hand holding a bundle comb. Her hair was pinned high, her jaw narrow, and her direct gaze unsettled Hazel more than resemblance usually could. The woman had Hazel's face without Hazel's weariness. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Ada Mercer, daughter of Silas, age 25, summer of 1903. Hazel carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside the brass lamp. She tried it in the desk, the tool cabinet, the old press drawer, and the small door beneath the stairs. It fit nothing. There it remained. The snow withdrew in gray bands from the walnut roots. The creek grew loud with meltwater, and pale catkins appeared along the branches where the chickadee had rested. Hazel repaired handles, cleaned ferrules, and copied Elias's ratios into a new ledger, but she did not begin the full trade that spring. The silver brush and the preserved hair were too exact to use before her own hands had learned steadiness. She chose one worn mercury dime from the cash and carried it to a coin dealer in Towson. With the money, she bought inexpensive hog bristle, 3 brass ferrules, lamp-black pigment, and a short length of oak dowel. She practiced on small bundles, discarding each one that twisted, shed, or failed to return to a point. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Hazel completed the first brush she was willing to keep. It was a 1-inch wash brush made from 2 measures of sable and 1 of split-bore bristle. She rolled the bundle 12 times across white card, removed 4 hairs that crossed the grain, and warmed the brass ferrule to 140 degrees. After pouring the pitch, she held it upright for 90 seconds, crimped it against the old block, and left it untouched for a full day. The next evening, she wet the point, loaded it with indigo, and drew 1 continuous line across a sheet of rag paper. The stroke began broad, narrowed without breaking, and ended in a point finer than thread. She wrote the date beneath it. By then, the front room had become a working shop again. The white pine floor held the dark shine of oil. The windows lifted without complaint, and the repaired plaster caught afternoon light without showing where old work ended and new work began. Elias's brass lamp stood on the counter. The iron clamp remained bolted to the bench, its cedar disc fitted back into place. The brass key waited until a storm split a dead limb from the oldest walnut tree. Hazel and Caleb, now taller and less solemn, sawed the limb away from the trunk. Beneath the torn bark, they found a small iron plate set flush into the wood, nearly swallowed by decades of growth. The plate bore the bound bristle mark. Hazel cleaned the keyhole with a needle, brought the brass key from the mantel, and turned it once. A narrow cavity opened inside the tree. Within it was a folded 48-star American flag, wrapped in oilskin, and a note dated August 20th, 1944. Ada Mercer had written it after news arrived that Thomas was missing in France. She had placed the flag there because Samuel, still a boy, could not bear to see it on the mantel, and because the walnut had been planted the day Thomas was born. "Keep this until the family can remember him for more than the way he died," the note said. A flag should mark a life before it marks a grave. Hazel refolded the flag along its old seams. She did not place it in the shop window. She kept it in a cedar box beneath the letter where cloth, paper, and metal could remain together. On July 11, 2025, the anniversary of the fighting near St. Lo, Hazel carried the Purple Heart to Baltimore National Cemetery. A records clerk had helped her locate Thomas Mercer's memorial inscription among those whose bodies had not returned. Hazel placed no wreath and made no speech. She laid one small finished brush beneath the stone, waited through the noon bells, and brought the metal home. Of the cash, she used 4 coins. 1 repaired the well pump. 1 bought the first good sable she used in a commission. 1 paid the filing fee to remove the demolition order. The 4th purchased a fireproof document chest. The remaining money stayed counted in the original stacks. Hazel sealed the tin again with waxed linen and placed it inside the mahogany chamber beneath the bristle clamp. Beside it, she left the drafts, copied but not removed, and a note bearing 3 words on the outside. For the next one, the shop reopened without a sign in the newspaper. Hazel pinned an index card to the corkboard inside Doris's cafe. Mercer, fine artist, brushes repairs, lettering brushes, small orders ask Doris for the address. The first customer was an art teacher who needed 2 damaged watercolor brushes reset. Then came a sign painter from Hereford, a conservator from Baltimore, and a woman who mailed 3 brushes wrapped in a dish towel. By autumn, the mailing list held 43 names. Hazel accepted only the work she could finish carefully. Doris received a pair of hand-dipped beeswax candles before taking payment for a single biscuit. Caleb returned in November carrying a plank beneath one arm. He had planed it from walnut taken from the storm-fallen limb and carved the old shop name across its face. The letters were deep, slightly uneven, and honest. Mercer, fine artist, brushes beneath them. In smaller letters he had added, "Daughters." Hazel ran her thumb through the fresh carving. There were no daughters after Ada, she said. Caleb shrugged. There could be. They hung the sign above the door with 2 hand-forged hooks. It did not make the shop famous. Most drivers passed without slowing. But people who needed the place found it, and those who entered learned to close the door gently because the brass bell had survived since 1903. On the 3rd anniversary of her arrival, Hazel sat at the long bench with a sheet of cream paper and Elias's silver-handled brush beside her. She began a letter in the same narrow ink he had used. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote about the roof measurements, the lime ratio, the way sash weights should hang free inside their pockets. She recorded Vernon's credit ledger, Amos's 3-stroke lesson, Doris's paper bags, Caleb's sign, and Reverend Boyd's forward prayer. She did not write that courage had saved her. She wrote that a warped door could be opened with a wooden case used as a lever, and that broken things should be sorted before they were discarded. At the bottom, she left space for another hand. Soft hairs, bound tightly and aimed in one direction, could carry enough color to make something lasting. Outside, snow began along the mill race. Hazel cleaned the silver brush, shaped its point between 2 fingers, and placed it beside the drying letter. The restored windows held their light. The chimney drew. The walnut sign moved once in the wind and settled. The historic paintbrush maker's loft waits. It has always waited. In the county annex, Margaret Vale retired the following spring. Before emptying her desk, she opened the lowest drawer and found a $6 bill folded beneath Elias Mercer's index card. She left both where they were for the next clerk, along with a penciled note, "Do not spend this. It belongs to the deed."